This is not a demonstration for our television camera. What you're watching is a crime in progress. This man is adding about $2,000 to the value of this 1985 Buick by losing 50,000 miles off the odometer. In the used car business, it's called busting miles, or whipping miles.
I want to show you one thing.
All right.
You know what's back there?
What's back there?
Yeah.
No.
There's a TV camera back there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been taping this whole thing.
Well, all right.
The good news is, we're not cops.
Well, I didn't think so.
The bad news is we're 60 Minutes.
Thanks for staying up later. Steve Kroft is with us. That's a classic 60 Minutes undercover style piece, the kind they don't do as frequently anymore, but that one could have been done 20 years ago.
Could have been done 20 years ago. We were incredibly lucky. You don't get characters like Bill Whitlow very often, but he was right out of the Dukes of Hazzard.
And he didn't seem terribly fazed by the fact that he'd been caught red-handed.
I don't think he actually fully comprehended exactly what was going on. And it's funny you mentioned this. We're doing a 25th anniversary show for 60 Minutes, and one of the things that Paul and Holly Fine, the producers, have done is to go back and find people who have been in past 60 Minutes stories. And it turns out that Bill Whitlow never watched 60 Minutes. Didn't even know exactly what it was. Now, sitting in the federal penitentiary, I'm told, he does know who Steve Kroft is, and he's very upset with me, and just as soon as he gets out, he's going to come and see me. That's what they said, but still 4 more years or something like that.
Whitlow claims he makes less than $1,000 a car, but that's still pretty good money. How much money does he make a month?
I'm saying average month you'll make 50 grand.
50 grand.
Yeah. See, I'm not as fast as I used to be. I know how to.
The best part of it for Whitlow is, he says the $50,000 a month is all tax-free.
Well, I ain't filed income tax myself for 13 years, 15 years.
That explains Bill Whitlow stumbling into this situation. Of course, that was done undercover.
Right.
But in most cases, it's not done undercover, and it brings up a question I've asked Mike Wallace and Morley Safer and others. At this point, with 60 Minutes' reputation long since established, if you've done anything questionable, why let those cameras roll in?
Well, Morley has the best story, I think, which all of us volunteer readily. He was making a speech in Philadelphia a couple of years ago, and somebody asked him that, why do the crooks sit down and talk to you? And Morley says, I think it's because as a crook, you've never really made it until you've been on 60 Minutes. And I think that's a matter of ego. I think people sometimes think that they want to go mano a mano, that they can somehow, you know, get the upper hand. Invariably, it's a mistake, particularly when we have the final edit.
And that is always a big question. No matter how even-handed the journalism is, I can see a reasonable person. For example, it was Henry Kissinger's misgiving about the piece that 60 Minutes was preparing on him. He said, look, I'll sit down and I'll talk with Mike Wallace, but not in edited fashion. I want to see what I'm responding to, and I'll do it live. Or at least unedited, at least live on tape.
Right. You'd have to be crazy to put somebody like Henry Kissinger or any politician on live to try and do 12 minutes, because most of those people are incredibly skillful at steering conversations whichever direction they want them to go, interrupting, whatever. And it's very hard. When you're doing a taped interview, you can just keep asking the question and asking the question and asking the question until you get some semblance of an answer.
But of course, there is a reasonable objection, not singling 60 Minutes out as being guilty of impropriety. In fact, their standard is higher than almost anywhere else you'll find in broadcast journalism. But in any case, there is a serious question about how these things are edited and what you're coming off of. You can make a relatively benign statement seem incriminating if it's coming off the wrong thing from the perspective of the interviewee, and it might be something he or she has never even seen.
Right. That's true. I would say that you could make the same argument for a writer for Vanity Fair or the New York Times or the Washington Post. It's what journalism is all about. It's taking a set of quotes and in pictures and putting them together to give people kind of an interpretation of a series of facts or events. I mean, nobody pretends that it's anything other than that.
Going back to the earlier question about why people submit to an examination by 60 Minutes, the Onondaga County Sheriff one of the principals in the story about prisoners being shackled supposedly declared, when he found out 60 Minutes was coming, "Boys, we've made the big time."
I was going to bring that up. It's exactly true. John Dillon is somebody I know from 20 years ago when I started off working as a reporter, along with you at WSYR television in Syracuse. And I think that there was something about John that just couldn't resist sitting down in front of the cameras to talk about it. And I think he was advised by the lawyers for the county sheriff's department not to do it, but he decided he wanted to go ahead and have a shot at it anyway.
Are you aware of any injury that's been caused to any of these inmates?
Swelling wrists, maybe legs, and a complaint of the loss of circulation.
Would you call that an injury?
Probably, yes. Well, I'd rather call it an aftermath than an injury. And once again, the loss of circulation is a claim. Maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. Who knows?
These prisoners in the Onondaga County jail had been shackled in a fashion that was uncommon, to put it mildly, maybe singular in the American penal system, right? And the prisoners claimed that they were suspended. There's some question about that, but in any case, they had been shackled for long periods of time in a way that was painful and excessive.
Right. Torture is what the Physicians for Human Rights called it. And since we did that story, the state legislature has gotten in the act, and the state corrections department, and they finally stopped it, or at least if they're, I don't know if they've stopped it, but I think the Onondaga County Sheriff's Department has stopped trying to defend it, or, and some might even thought bragging about it.
You got into the shackles yourself. There's always a line there that you have to be aware of. You have to sense it. It's not an objective line. At what point am I getting a better sense of the story and making it clearer for the viewer, and at what point have I crossed a line and needlessly injected myself into it?
I think that's right. I think we had a long debate about whether I was going to actually be shackled up, and we, of course, weren't sure whether the Sheriff's Department would agree to it anyway. But it was so hard trying to describe exactly what was going on that we thought it was a good visual illustration. Because short of shackling yourself to a bar, it was very difficult to kind of explain and give the viewer any kind of a sense for exactly what was going on. We kept talking about stretching people out, and so that they were suspended above the bunks, and we tried to do it with pictures, but it was not quite the same thing.
We also spoke with this man, who asked to have his voice and his face disguised. He told us he's taken part in more than 100 shacklings while working at the jail, and none of them were anything like our demonstration.
Is that normally the way they start out in a lying position?
No, you'd be sitting up.
Is that normally the bar that they shackle them to?
No, it's the one above it. If you were sitting up, you'd see that your head and arms would probably rest right about at that height.
Next step would be very simply to apply the leg irons.
When they're finally tied down, when they're finally shackled, what's the typical reaction? Do they scream? Do they yell? Do they plead?
Yeah, screaming, yelling, pleading. Some pass out eventually, fall asleep. But normally they're crying and screaming and yelling all night long.
All night long?
Yeah, occasionally. Until they fall asleep or pass out.
24-hour weather information service from 12 News is brought to you by Pick and Save and Duracell. You can't top the Copper Top.
Back in September, we saw a story in the Wall Street Journal by Robert Johnson and Caleb Solomon. It was about Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Hales, one of the Army's brightest stars, the commander of an elite helicopter squadron who seemed destined to make general. Until one night along the Iraqi border, when he made a simple mistake and pushed a button that fired a missile that cost 2 American lives and ruined his own.
You won a Peabody Award for the friendly fire story. And I think perhaps your experience in Vietnam made you more sensitive to what was at stake in this story and the emotions that went into it, and probably better prepared you to report it.
Yeah, I felt I had very strong feelings. I spent a year and a half in Vietnam and spent time in covering lots of wars, including Grenada, in which a number of the casualties, I think actually even a majority of the American casualties, were caused by friendly fire. So I know how common it is, and I was amazed to see the Army leave this one helicopter pilot kind of out to dry. identified him, did everything possible to kind of ruin his life.
For perspective's sake, I think the number of American casualties in the Persian Gulf was 145 and 35 by friendly fire.
Right. It happens all the time. And I didn't like the fact that the Army was able to effectively not only ruin his career, although you have to accept the consequences of an action like that, but his life in many ways. I mean, they took his family 24 hours after it happened. They had essentially moved into the officers' quarters and told them to pack out, to move. Put the family literally, you know, almost on the street, as they tell it anyway. And I felt I had very sympathetic feelings towards him. He was, Ralph Hales is his name, very kind of cocky, very smart, the kind of a guy you want commanding a helicopter battalion if you're at war. Some people thought he was a little trigger happy, too much of a hot dog, and we asked him and we kind of broke him down. I think it's probably the best interview I've ever done. There's a perception on some people's part, I think, that you're a bit of a hot dog, a hot shot, gung-ho. That you couldn't wait to be out there, that you couldn't wait to get the first kills in your battalion, that you were trigger happy.
That's pretty vicious. That's pretty vicious. Somebody went and told one of the families that.
If there wouldn't have been a war, I wouldn't have shot him. And if I wouldn't have gone on that mission, I wouldn't have shot him. And if they wouldn't have been parked this way, I wouldn't have shot him. And if he wouldn't have said shoot him, I wouldn't have shot him. There's all kinds of reasons those guys got shot. None of which is triggerhead. None of which is triggerhead.
The other thing I thought that was interesting about that story, and I've never really talked about it with anybody, when we were putting the story together, we tried to get videotape of it. We knew that there would be camera pictures.
That's what really made it compelling, to see the radar screen and hear the radio transmission of the conversations that took place when they made the hit.
I hope it's enemy. That's all right. Just stay on.
Here it comes.
I guess you could say that hit it.
I'll go ahead and shoot the second vehicle. It's still intact, but it's fixing to go away.
You're ready in the back. Let's do him. This bud's for you.
Uh-oh.
That's all right. He's dead, too.
Ooh-wee, did we hit those targets?
And then seconds later, when they realized that they had hit their own vehicles.
It certainly wouldn't have been the story that it was. It was the combination of the interview and the videotape. And, but it was very difficult to get the videotape. Finally, a copy showed up in the hands of a third party, who I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention. And we knew of the existence of the videotape, but it was in a strange format. I mean, it's not like on VHS or PAL or NTSC, any of the common television formats that anybody would know. It's for security reasons, obvious security reasons. The only people that have these machines are the military and the manufacturer. So we went all over New York, finally found some crazy electronics eccentric who could kind of jury rig something so we could get an image on the screen. And 2 days before the story aired, we went off and we found a guy in Israel who said he could do it and get us much better quality. So I put Harry Radlett, the producer, and I put Frank Devine, the associate producer, on a plane. I think it was on a Wednesday night. Flew to Israel, got off, took a taxi cab, went to this place, got it transferred, came back, got on a plane, flew back, and got there just the day before we put it on the air. We were never sure up until the last minute whether the Pentagon was going to come through the door and say, look, you can't broadcast or transmit this. And we had certain moral reservations about it anyway, just whether we want to show 2 American soldiers being killed by an American helicopter. And finally we decided that we were going to put it on the air. We weren't sure whether the Pentagon was going to come through the door. They knew we had the footage. So finally on Friday we called them and we told them we had the footage and we intended it to run. And was there anything on the screen, any images, any numbers, anything that was top security that they did not want on the air? And they gave us, yes, as a matter of fact, there is a line of numbers at the bottom. We would prefer you not to broadcast the tape, but if you're going to broadcast the tape, block out the numbers at the bottom, which we did.
5 seconds after the second vehicle blew up and the call came in, friendly vehicles are hit, it was horror.
Iron Dude Stalwart's reporting that maybe friendly vehicles may have been hit over. Don't you dare say that. Roger, I was afraid of that. I was really afraid of that. Ceasefire. Ceasefire.
He had violated procedure by, instead of overseeing the operation, actually taking to the trigger himself, right?
Right.
And that, rather than the simple fact that Americans perish through friendly fire, which unfortunately happens more frequently than we might realize, it was that fact that led to his being tossed out.
It was the fact that he was there. It's been, you know, a year and a half. It's the fact that he was flying on the mission himself. The fact that the division commander, the battalion commander, had said that they did not want officers, top officers, flying their own missions and firing. A lot of people took it to be trigger happy. You know, said this is the sign that this guy is trigger happy. In fact, his argument was that the conditions were very bad. There was sandstorms in the area, and he didn't think that it was a good mission to fly anyway because of the weather conditions, and he didn't want to risk one of his own men's life, and he wanted to go himself.
Did you have any sense that Hales will be able to piece his life together? Because as you said, others, tragically, have been in his position. Only he has been publicly exposed to this extent. How's he going to deal with it?
Well, I think he's dealt with it by going out and getting a job. He's trying to work, he's got a job in San Antonio as a stockbroker. I think that most people probably won't even know who he is or recognize him or remember him. It's not the notoriety. I think he'll have a hard time living with himself. I don't think that he'll probably ever forget it, even for a single day in his life. You would have preferred that the families not know who you were.
That's correct. I'd like to be like all those other people who pull the triggers and hit our own troops.
Anonymous.
Correct. That would be wonderful, to be anonymous.
You didn't ask Mrs. Talley to forgive you. You didn't ask any of the families to forgive you. Why not?
It just didn't seem right to me to sit out here and you know, I'm intact and I'm going on with my life. It just didn't seem right for me to ask them to forgive me. I just wanted to tell them I'm very sorry. I didn't want to make them feel obligated to forgive me. I shouldn't have made that mistake. I was better than that, but I made it.
There are no fixed battle lines or fronts here. A short while ago, this street was controlled by the Army, and you could move down it, but not anymore.
Have you ever felt you were in danger on any of your stories? Had to go undercover a few times? Do you ever think you were this close to getting whacked? I mean whacked in the sense of me reaching over and whacking you, not in the mob sense of getting whacked like it's all over.
I thought in the
Costas sense, not the Gotti sense.
I thought in the odometer story that I was going to get punched out, not by one. We went to a second or third auto lot and tried to engage in a conversation and explain to the man that there was this car on his lot and we had all this information about it and it had a lot more miles on it than he said it did, and he was not amused at all.
No, I don't have to talk to you. Hey, you and Doc May, come on.
We just had a question.
Hi, my name's Steve Kroft.
I'm Jim Willis. How you doing?
For 60 Minutes. We're here looking at this car, and we just wanted to know where those 30,000 miles go and how did this happen?
I have no idea.
He wanted us off the lot immediately and threatened to punch my lights out, shoot my lights out, knock me cold. And so we left pretty quickly because I really thought he was going to do it.
What kind of backup does Kroft or Wallace or Safer or Rather in days gone by, what kind of backup do they have? Are there 4 or 5 burly guys waiting to intercede in case it gets violent?
Well, there's not. Well, it's an interesting point because they said, well, how can you just look at the guy and ask him that question? You think he's going to jump right up and strangle you. But what you don't see is 2 camera setups with 2 sound men and lights and everything. We have. Whenever we go in to do an interview, we pretty much physically control the surroundings, just in sheer numbers.
Except when it's undercover.
Except when it's undercover, right. I was worried a little bit during the odometer scam. But the two gentlemen that we were with and who had helped us set this whole thing up had a piece right in the desk, and they were very big, and so I wasn't too concerned about that. I think I'm more worried going into just inherently dangerous situations like going to Beirut, for example. I went back there last year, and it had been almost 5 years since a CBS News correspondent, an American CBS News correspondent, had been in there. And I was concerned about, ending up in a closet in the Bekaa Valley for, 3 years or something like that. I was a little bit nervous about it. You try not to go into situations that you're too nervous about, unless, I was working for Dan Rather on the CBS Evening News, spent a lot of time in El Salvador back in the early 80s when the fighting was very strong. I ended up in a lot of situations in firefights that I didn't particularly want to be in. You know that's probably only going to last for 24, 48 hours, and you just try and stay alive.
The center of town is teeming with guerrilla snipers. Civil Guardsman Jose Norris told us there were two just around the corner. But not even he realized just how close they were. Steve Kroft, CBS News, Usulután, El Salvador.
With the conversation rolling along with Steve Kroft, we reach the point where we have to stop, but we have a remedy. We'll tape another show, get into the interview with Bill and Hillary Clinton, his conversation with Woody Allen, some thoughts about Mike Wallace, Don Hewitt, and the 60 Minutes approach. We'll do that next time with Steve Kroft. Until then, see you later.